My name is Brett West. I was 38 when this happened. And up to that point, I was the kind of man who trusted a multimeter more than a story. I worked as an electrician at a mountaintop coal operation in southern Appalachia, lived at the bottom of a narrow hollow, and believed most trouble had a source you could trace if you were patient. Loose neutral, water in a junction box, battery drain, human error 9 times out of 10. I grew up hearing men on porches talk about upright wolves in the ridges after too many beers, and I filed all of it in the same mental drawer as ghost lights and buried treasure maps. Stories for long nights. Nothing more. Our place sat where the paved county road gave up and turned to patched gravel, then mud after any decent rain. The hollow pinched tight on both sides, or in steep hardwood slopes, climbing up into oak and poplar, with rhododendron thick near the creek, like a wall of dark green rope. In summer, the damp held low until mid-morning, and by evening you could smell creek water and cut grass and diesel from my truck all at once. We had a single wide house my father had expanded years earlier, a shed full of tools and wire spools, and an old camper parked beside the cinder block steps on the east side, mostly used for overflow guests and storage. 2 hounds, Duke and Mags, slept under the porch and barked at anything that crossed our lower fence line, including delivery vans and one unlucky turkey that wandered in last spring. My days ran on routine because routine kept life manageable. I left before sunrise, thermos in the cup holder, radio low, and taking the switchbacks up toward the mine while fog still sat in the valleys. At the operation, my job was not glamorous, but it was steady and technical and real. Conveyor drives, breaker panels, emergency shut-off diagnostics, replacing fried relays after storms rolled through. Most issues were urgent because lost power meant lost production, and lost production meant a line of supervisors in hard hats pretending they were not worried. I liked the pressure more than I admitted. There is comfort in a clean fault path. There is relief in hearing a motor kick back to life after you chase a failure through a rat nest of old conduit. At lunch, men talked about hunting leases, blown transmissions, divorces, and who was working what shift. If the conversation drifted into legends, I tuned it out. One guy swore he had seen glowing eyes on the Hall Road shoulder one winter up higher than his hood line, and everybody laughed and called him dramatic. I laughed too, mostly because in those circles you either joined the joke or became the joke. The practical rule where I worked was simple. If you cannot test it, do not build your life around it. Home was Aaron at the stove, Noah doing homework at the table, and me checking systems before I sat down. Well pump pressure, mud room lock, motion light by the shed. I did those things without thinking. Aaron used to tease me that I could not relax until I had confirmed every switch did what the label said it did. She was not wrong. Aaron worked part-time at a pharmacy in town and managed the house like she had 5 extra hands. Noah was 12, lanky, always half one shoe untied. Smart in that way. Kids are when they absorb details you do not realize you are leaking. He called me Brett, not Dad. That never bothered me. Respect takes shape in ordinary moments, not names. One evening in early fall, a grease flare in the kitchen got into old wall insulation before we got it knocked down. The volunteer crew contained it fast, and the structural damage was limited. But the kitchen wiring and part of the wall had to be opened up and rebuilt. No one was hurt. That mattered most. The adjuster wanted 2 weeks for repairs if materials arrived on time, maybe longer if subcontractors got delayed. We had options technically. Hotel in Beckley, Aaron's sister's place, maybe a rental. But I had the old camper on site with water hookup and a working converter, and I figured staying put would keep life normal while work got done. I said it like a plan. It was really stubbornness dressed as efficiency. Aaron stood by the sink that night while I laid out extension cords and adapter plugs on the counter that had not burned. 2 weeks in that thing, she said, all 3 of us? It beats packing everyone up and driving back and forth, I told her. Noah can still catch his bus here. I can keep an eye on the contractors. We have power, we have heat, we have a lock on the door. She folded her arms and looked past me toward the blackened section of wall. You always think if you can wire around a problem, it stops being one. Sometimes that is exactly what fixes it. Sometimes, she said. Then, softer, I need this not to turn into one of your pride projects. Noah looked up from his phone and said, No, this camper life could be kind of fun for like 3 days. That got a laugh out of all 3 of us, and in hindsight, that laugh had a bitter edge to it. At the time it felt normal, just family trying to make inconvenience smaller by naming it differently. We moved in over 2 evenings. Clothes in duffel bags, dry food in plastic bins, a small electric heater for cool nights. I checked the camper pedestal, swapped a worn connector, and ran a fresh ground rod, because I did not trust the old one. I replaced the dead porch bulb, mounted a temporary floodlight over the steps, and fixed the lopsided door latch that had stuck since my uncle owned the thing. By the 2nd week of September, we had settled into a reduced version of home. Coffee on the tiny stove, boots lined by the door, but Noah doing math at the dinette, while Erin read shift schedules on her phone, and I cleaned mud off my tools with a rag. For a while, nothing about it felt threatening. Cramped, yes. Annoying, definitely, but manageable. On clear nights, we would sit outside until the chill came in, and the hollow would be loud the way it had always been. Tree frogs by the creek, katydids in the brush, coyotes calling from the higher ridge after midnight. Duke and Mags patrolled their usual loops and came back smelling like leaves and mud, satisfied with themselves. I slept hard after 12-hour shifts and woke before my alarm most mornings. If you asked me then whether I felt vulnerable living in a camper with my family, I would have told you no. I had lights, locks, dogs, and a shotgun within reach. In my framework, that was prepared enough. The first change was so subtle I only noticed it because routine gave me a baseline. One night after shift, I cut the truck engine, and the quiet sat there too clean, like someone had pulled one layer out of the sound around us. No frogs, no creek chorus, even the water was running steady. I stood with my hand on the doorframe and listened for coyotes from the ridge. Nothing. I told myself, temperature drop, maybe pressure shift ahead of rain. I checked the weather app. Clear for 48 hours. I shrugged it off and hauled groceries into the camper. The next night it happened again, and this time Duke and Mags would not follow me past the porch steps. Duke planted his feet and leaned backward against his own leash like he was anchored to the boards. Mags kept her nose high, drawing short, sharp pulls through her nostrils, and its hackles standing in a stiff ridge from shoulder to tail. Neither dog barked. That was what bothered me. They whined low, almost under their breath, and watched the dark toward the rhododendron line without blinking much. I had seen them charge at bobcats and chase black bears out of the yard with more confidence than good sense. I had not seen them do this. I clipped their leads to the porch rail and took my flashlight down to the cinder blocks anyway, mostly to prove to myself they were acting strange for no reason. The beam hit wet mud, beer can from last week, old bolt I had dropped, normal clutter. No obvious tracks then, no eye shine, no movement, just that stillness. Back inside, Aaron looked up and said, "What is wrong with them?" "Probably coyote scent close in," I said. "Or bear passed through earlier." She watched me 1 second longer than usual, reading my face the way she always did. "You do not sound convinced?" "I am not worried," I said, and that was true in a narrow technical sense. I was not worried yet. I was irritated, alert, and already sorting causes. Worry came later. On the third night, the smell showed up. Thick and damp, like wet fur left in a metal shed, with a rusted iron note under it and something sweet rotten that caught at the back of my throat. It sat around the camper in pockets, strongest near the steps and along the driver's side where the brush crowded close. Inside, with the door shut, it faded. Outside, it came and went in pulses. I walked the perimeter with a headlamp and told myself dead deer in the drainage ditch, maybe, or old bait pile from somebody trespassing and hunting out of season. I checked the ditch. Nothing but leaves and 2 soda bottles. I checked under the camper frame. Clean. I checked the well cap and the gray water outlet in case something had backed up. No leak, no spill. By the 4th evening, even Noah noticed the silence before I said anything. He stood on the top step with his backpack and listened to the dark like he was waiting for a joke to land. "It is weird out here now," he said, "like the woods are paused." I wanted to tell him he was imagining it, but that would have been a lie, and kids can hear a lie even when you hide it in calm words. "Probably weather pressure," I said instead. "Animals move around with fronts." "There is no wind." "Still counts." He nodded because 12-year-olds have to decide, moment by moment, warranting whether adults are giving them truth or comfort. He let it go and went inside to finish homework. I stayed out with the flashlight and finally found what did not fit. In fresh mud by the cinder block steps were tracks too long for any dog we had deeper than my boot print, even though I outweighed most men at work. The impression looked wrong in a way I had trouble naming. Elongated heel pad, forward claws set farther apart than a canine, and stride spacing that suggested a heavy body passing with long intervals, as if it was shifting weight high and forward between landings. A bear can leave odd prints when it steps in its own track, and I told myself that first. Yet then I measured the distance between impressions with my tape from my pocket and got almost 50 inches center to center on a diagonal line that cut from brush to steps and back toward brush again. I crouched there with my light, running explanations in cycles. Displaced black bear from blasting zones up the mountain. Feral mastiff from one of the abandoned trailers. Some mind guy pulling a prank with carved feet because he knew I hated nonsense. Trespasser trying to spook me off. Inherited land cheap so he could make an offer later. Every option sounded thin, but each sounded better than the old porch stories. I took photos with my phone, set a tape measure beside the clearest print, and covered one with an upside-down tote to protect it from dew so I could check it in daylight. When I climbed back into the camper, Aaron saw the mud on my jeans and asked, "Bear?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe a big dog. I'm going to put another floodlight up tomorrow." She stared at me, then at the shotgun I had leaned beside the dinette instead of in the truck rack. "Brett, it is just caution." She did not argue. That unsettled me more than if she had. The timing pattern snapped into focus over the next 2 nights. It always began just after my truck lights went dark. I would pull in, kill the engine, and within minutes, the smell thickened around the camper and the dogs stiffened on the porch. If I came home early, it started early. If I got held over at the mine and came in late, it started late. That was not weather, and it was not random animal movement. It felt like a response, like something waited upslope for one specific signal and moved only when it got it. I did not tell Aaron that part yet. I told myself I needed one more day, one more set of tracks, one clean piece of evidence that lined up with something ordinary. Practical men can waste a lot of time protecting old beliefs. I spent that week doing exactly that, standing in my own yard with a flashlight and a set jaw, acting like logic alone could make the hollow sound right again. The next evening I came home early and tried to get ahead of it. I mounted a second motion flood on the shed corner, angled across the first beam over the camper steps, then replaced the weak bulb over the porch with a brighter LED, so there were no dead zones between the house and the trailer. I checked every latch, tightened the striker plate on the camper door, and moved a 5-gallon bucket of clean gravel under the steps so any new prints would read clearer than mud. Erin watched me through the window while she stirred chili on the little stove, and I could feel her deciding whether to challenge me or let me work. She let me work. Dark came in bands down there. Ridgeline first, then treetops, then the low part by the creek where the fog gathered. At full dark, the lights kicked on clean when I walked outside. Motion sensors doing what they were built to do. White cones across wet grass and aluminum siding. For 20 minutes, I felt foolish in the best way, standing with my coffee and listening to ordinary night sounds returning in pieces. 1 cricket, then 2. Leaves shifting on the slope. I started to think maybe the pressure had broken. Maybe whatever had passed through was gone. Maybe this whole thing was a short run of bad reads stitched together by tired nerves. Then Duke made that low throat sound from the porch. Not a bark, not a whine. More like a warning held in place. Mags pressed against the screen door and trembled hard enough to rattle it. The smell moved in a few seconds later, heavy and damp, and this time it carried a hot animal note that felt fresh, like whatever produced it was close enough that the breeze had not thinned it yet. Both floods fired at once toward the rhododendron wall and caught nothing but leaves and white stems. The movement was there anyway. I did not see a body or shape, but I saw the leaves flex in a long path that did not match wind. A shoulder-height push through dense brush with no snapping branches. I stepped off the porch with the flashlight, the shotgun unloaded but in my left hand, and walked to the edge where grass met brush. The beam gave me 10 yards of certainty, and then swallowed into black. Twice I found places where saplings had been bent down and twisted. Not broken clean like storm damage, just pushed and held until fibers gave. I measured 1 bend against my chest and came up near 6 feet where the pressure marks sat. Bears can shove brush. Men can too. What bothered me was the pattern. 3 bent stems in a line, each a little farther upslope, as if something had moved on 2 contact points and used the same side of its body to clear passage. When I turned back, I caught the new scratch marks on the camper. 3 vertical grooves in the paint beside the rear corner, shoulder high on me, bright metal showing through white enamel. They were narrow and evenly spaced, with each line curving slightly at the end. Not like a rake dragged by a kid, not like random scrape from moving equipment. I put my fingers in them and felt burrs pulled outward, which meant force had come from outside in a downward pull. Erin opened the door behind me and called my name, and I snapped at her to stay inside harder than I meant to. She did, but the hurt on her face sat with me the rest of the night. I told myself, feral dog with long nails jumping up. I told myself black bear testing smells near food. I told myself someone in the dark trying to unsettle us and loving the reaction. Those explanations were thin, but they were still explanations. And at that point, I needed any frame that kept the world inside known rules. Around midnight, the noises started, light taps along the camper skin, then long pauses, then 2 more taps near the bunk end where Noah slept. I sat on the dinette bench with the shotgun loaded, listening to Erin breathe shallow in the dark and Noah turning pages under his blanket with a headlamp, because he pretended reading meant he was not scared. The taps continued for maybe 10 minutes and stopped the moment I thumbed the safety off. That timing sat wrong in my chest. Thursday night followed the same sequence within minutes of my truck lights going dark. Silence dropping in layers, dogs freezing at the porch, smell pooling around the steps, then small sounds testing the perimeter. Friday night, 5 days after the first clear tracks, it came in sharper, and by then I could map it by the clock. That evening I found prints in my gravel bucket, and on the wet strip beyond it, deeper than before, mixed with toe marks ending in hooked points. One print landed on the metal lip of the bottom step and left a smear that looked oily in flashlight glare. Another sat 3 feet farther than the last set from earlier in the week, stride widening as if confidence had grown. The line of travel did not wander the yard. It circled the camper twice and stopped under Noah's window both times. I did not show him that part. I kicked dirt over the marks before he came out for the bus and told him to use the front path by the house until I fixed drainage. He looked at me with that same measuring expression and said, okay, but he stayed close enough that his shoulder brushed mine on the way to the truck. After school, I pulled him aside and gave him simple rules with no drama in my voice. No going outside after dark without me. No opening the camper door for any sound unless he heard my exact words. And if lights failed, he went straight to the bathroom floor because it had the least glass around it. He nodded too fast and asked if this was because of a bear. I said yes because I could not hand a 12-year-old uncertainty and expect him to sleep. That night gave me the first sign that read as openly predatory. Around 10, Duke started growling toward the lower fence line, then cut off mid-sound like his breath got trapped. Mags pressed flat to the porch and would not move. I took the spotlight to the fence and swept left to right. At first I saw only weeds and posts. Then I found the deer remains near the gate, not torn apart the way coyotes usually leave a site, just laid there in a deliberate line, rib section and hide folded against the wire as if set down, not fed on. No drag marks from uphill. No tracks except the same long prints coming in from the creek, cut and back out. It looked like placement, a message in meat and bone from something that understood boundaries and wanted us to understand them too. I slept maybe 90 minutes total and left for work with a headache sitting behind my eyes. At the mine substation, I pulled my foreman, Calvin Reese, aside while we waited on lockout clearance for a conveyor repair. I showed him the photos on my phone, zoomed prints with tape measure, the scratch lines on siding, the deer set by the fence. He squinted, grinned, and said, "West, you got hollow nerves now. Them old stories finally got to you. Big dog, maybe bear. It put your trash up and quit feeding the wildlife." "I do not leave feed out." "Then somebody dumped roadkill on your place to mess with you. You got enemies?" "Not enough to stage tracks." He handed the phone back and shrugged. "If it was dangerous, your dogs would be dead or gone. They are still there, right?" "Yeah." "There you go." Calvin was not cruel. He was practical in his own way, and his model of danger had hard limits. If a threat did not fit those limits, it got downgraded to nuisance. I understood that model because I used it myself. I just could not make my evidence fit inside it anymore. I started documenting everything with the same method I used on electrical faults: date, time, weather, wind, moon phase, activity. I bought a trail camera at the farm store in town, a 1 rated for low light stills and short video clips, and mounted it to a poplar facing the camper steps at a slight downward angle so I could capture both approach path and door. I set a second cheap camera near the shed to cross-check movement if one failed. I also ran a line from the house panel to power a spare motion flood on an independent breaker, not because I expected power loss, but because separate circuits reduce single-point failure. Aaron watched me zip tie cable and said, "You are treating this like a job site." "It keeps me from guessing," I said. She leaned against the truck and spoke in that controlled tone she used when she was trying not to argue in front of Noah. I need to hear you say what you think this is." "I think it is a large animal that got used to people and lost fear." "You believe that?" "I believe it enough to set lights and keep us inside." "That is not what I asked." I looked at the ridge line and did not answer fast enough. Her jaw tightened, then she nodded once and went back in. Silence with Aaron was rarer than shouting and much harder to sit with. The first 2 nights with cameras gave me nothing useful. Motion triggers filled the card with moth blurs, 1 raccoon and me in boxer shorts checking sensors at 2 a.m, like a man starring in a cautionary tale about sleep deprivation. I actually laughed at one clip where I jumped at my own reflection in the camper window. 48 hours later, the humor was gone. On the 3rd night, both cameras recorded static bursts at 11:42, not full failure, just horizontal tearing and digital snow for about 30 seconds. Then video resumed on the poplar unit with a dark frame that should have shown the floodlit steps. Instead, it looked underexposed, like someone had draped cloth over the lens. 1 still image appeared between clips. 2 eye reflections, amber green, level with the lower edge of the camper windshield. I measured that in daylight, 7 feet 2 inches off ground. I brought the files to the deputy substation on Saturday morning because paper trail matters when situations drift toward risk. Deputy Harmon met me at the front desk, took the printouts, and watched the clip twice on my phone. He was polite, and that somehow made it worse because his face never shifted from neutral. "You have livestock losses?" he asked. "No." "Any direct attack?" "Not yet." "Property damage besides scratches?" "Tracks around a sleeping area window." "Deer remains arranged by my fence?" He gave a small exhale and said, "Could be coyote pack behavior around a carcass. Could be a bear standing up against your camper skin. Could be somebody messing around. We can make a report for suspicious activity, but I cannot assign night patrol for wildlife signs alone unless there's active threat or an injured person." I pointed at the eye height measurement note. Coyotes do not stand 7 feet off the ground. He looked at the paper, then back at me. Phone cameras flatten depth. We get weird artifacts all the time. Keep your family inside after dark. Secure food waste. Call if it escalates. It has escalated. I hear you. I am telling you what I can do today. He filed the report, number and all, and promised to swing by when he had daylight availability. He came the next afternoon, walked the yard in full sun, photographed prints blurred by dew, measured scratches, and suggested I spread lime around the perimeter to discourage animals crossing scent lines. He did not stay to dusk. He did not step into the brush line once shadows lengthened. I called a wildlife officer on Monday and left a message with details. He returned the call that evening while I was rewiring a loose pedestal connection by the camper. He listened longer than the others and asked practical questions about gate spacing, odor persistence, and whether the dogs showed freeze response or pursuit behavior. That got my attention. I said, freeze. He paused and then said he could come out midweek, but was covering 3 counties and could not promise night hours unless there was livestock kill or direct human contact. Same boundary, different wording. By Tuesday night, my rational list had narrowed but not settled. Bear still possible, though gait and hand marks. Fought it. Big feral dog did not explain height, stride, or the way branches moved without noise. Human prank did not explain smell pulses or how quickly it cleared terrain. I kept cycling through options because the alternative required admitting a category I had rejected my whole life. I was not ready to cross that line, but I was close enough to see it. I loaded fresh shells into the shotgun, set it beside the dinette, and sat down with my notebook open while Aaron put Noah to bed. At 9:17, the outside flood by the shed clicked on. No trigger at the steps. At 9:18, both dogs started that low synchronized growl, one on each side of the porch. At 9:19, the smell hit, thick enough that Noah gagged in the bathroom and asked if a sewer line had busted. I told him no and closed every vent. At 9:21 came 3 slow thuds on the camper wall by the dinette. Not tapping this time, not exploratory, just pressure impacts spaced like someone testing frame strength. Then all sound stopped except breathing outside my window. Deliberate inhale and exhale, deep enough to vibrate the aluminum skin under my elbow. I turned off the interior light, moved the blind 1 inch, and saw nothing but dark brush and my own reflection. The breathing continued, and from the angle and height I knew it was standing almost level with me, close enough to touch the glass. Worried, I held the blind with 2 fingers and barely lifted it, just enough to cut the reflection of my own face out of the glass. The breathing stayed steady outside, slow pulls in, longer pushes out, the kind of volume you feel in your ribs as much as here. At first I saw only the floodlight wash on wet leaves and the black gaps between rhododendron trunks. Then 2 points caught the edge of that light and fixed on me. They were not bright like a cat's eyes or the quick flash you get from a deer crossing headlights. They sat deep, amber with a green cast at the center, and they held level at a height that made my brain reject what I was seeing. I had measured that window line before when I leveled the camper. The lower edge of the windshield sat a little over 7 feet from grade, where the ground sloped off. The eyes were right there. He's maybe an inch above, and perfectly still. I eased the blind down and backed 1 step, keeping the shotgun low so the barrel would not clink against the dinette. My mouth had gone dry. Erin stood by the bunk curtain, one hand on the fabric, and I could tell she had heard the breathing too because her chest was barely moving, like she was trying not to add any sound to the camper. Noah's voice came from the top bunk, thin and awake. "Brett, is it a bear?" I wanted one clean lie, something useful, something a kid could hold on to until morning. "Stay down," I whispered. "Do not come off that bunk. Just stay still and quiet." "What is out there? Stay down." Erin moved closer to me and kept her voice to breath level. "You saw it?" "I saw eyes." "Where?" "Window height." She blinked once, did the math the same way I had, and her hand found the edge of the counter because she needed something solid. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after that. The only sound was that inhale and exhale outside the wall, patient and controlled, not winded, not frantic, like it had all night and knew exactly how long it could stand there. I told myself it could be a bear on hind legs, braced against the frame. I told myself eyeshine can distort in angled light. I told myself depth goes strange through double-pane glass and cheap flood bulbs. My head kept producing explanations while the rest of me rejected them one by one. A bear shifts. It snorts, paws, huffs. It makes brush noise. Whatever stood out there did none of it. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse because I could not place it anymore. I waited 3 counts, then 6, then 10. I raised the blind another inch and found the eyes again. Now farther left, still level, still watching. They had moved without a single branch crack or leaf shake I could hear through that thin camper wall. They held there for maybe 5 seconds, then tilted together in a slow angle that read like a head cock, an animal studying a puzzle, and the reflections winked out at the same instant. No retreat noise, no footfall, just gone. I stayed at the window until my shoulder cramped, sweeping with a handheld light through every lane in the brush. The beam found wet stems, fence wire, the shed corner, and my own truck mirror throwing glare back. No body, no eyes. The smell lingered, thick enough that Noah started coughing into his blanket from the bunk, and Erin passed him a wet cloth to breathe through. I did not open the door, or whatever pride I had left about checking the yard alone could wait until daylight. By 3 a.m, we were all awake and pretending otherwise. Noah lay rigid with the blanket over his chest and headphones in, no music playing. Erin sat at the dinette with both hands around a mug she never drank from. I stood near the door, shotgun loaded, flashlight in my pocket, watching the seam where the door frame met the jamb because that was where I expected pressure if anything came back. Once, around 3:40, Duke gave one clipped bark from under the porch and then quieted as if corrected by something I could not see. When gray finally pushed into the hollow, I stepped out before the sun reached the yard. The smell had thinned but not vanished. Dew covered the grass, except in a line from the rhododendron toward the camper, where tall stalks were brushed dry at chest level, like a broad body had moved through and taken the moisture off with fur. Below the window I found no paw prints, no claw marks on siding, nothing neat or complete. 10 feet off near the gravel bucket, there were 2 deep impressions in wet dirt that looked half-formed, as if only the front portion of a track had carried weight. The depth told me mass. The spacing told me reach. I measured from one to the other and got 52 inches, On the glass itself, high near the top corner, I could barely touch on tiptoe. There was a cloudy oval in the condensation, wider than my palm, as if hot breath had fogged it from outside and then dried unevenly. I photographed it with a tape measure held up for scale and sent everything to my own email, so I had backups if the phone got damaged. That was habit from work. Never keep critical records in one place. Erin came out with Noah behind her and stopped at the bottom step when she saw the measuring tape stretched between impressions. "We are leaving tonight," she said. No argument in her tone, just decision. "I can call my sister." I kept looking at the prints, because looking at her meant admitting she was right. Wildlife officer said he would come midweek. If we leave, we lose the pattern. Pattern for what, Brett? For who believes us, I do not care. Noah stood close enough that his sleeve touched mine, eyes on the fogged spot on the window. It was looking in at me, right? I turned toward him fast. It did not get in. Door held, city lights held. "You did exactly what I told you." "That is not what I asked." I had no answer he could trust. Erin put her hand on his shoulder and guided him back up the steps before the conversation could split open. The day dragged with that tired, electric feeling you get after storm work, when every noise reads like a fault opening somewhere out of sight. I stayed home from shift and told Calvin I had a family emergency. He made a joke about camper fever, and I let it pass because explaining felt useless. I added 2 pieces of half-inch plywood to the lower inside of the camper door, through-bolted to spread force across the frame if something hit it. I tested both flood circuits twice, swapped batteries in the trail camera, and moved the dogs inside the house shell even though the kitchen still smelled like scorched insulation from the fire. Duke paced from window to window. Mags hid under the old dining table and would not come out for food until afternoon. By the second evening after the eyes at the window, clouds had rolled in from the west and the hollow held low fog over the creek, like breath lying flat on the ground. I told Erin we would run one more night with full lighting and the camera active, then leave at first light regardless of what happened. She looked at me for a long time and said, "One night, you swear it." "I swear it." Noah asked to sleep in the truck cab with the doors locked. I said no because I needed him where I could reach him quickly. Yates then changed my mind 10 minutes later and made a compromise. He could lie on the dinette bench with boots on and his backpack packed, truck keys on the counter. He nodded and did not argue. That scared me more than tears would have. At 9:06, the house power dipped hard enough to make the camper lights blink twice. The converter gave that strained hum I hated, then recovered. 40 seconds later, it dipped again, longer, and the rear flood on the shed circuit went dead, while the step flood stayed on. Separate breakers, separate run. They should not have failed together unless the feed upstream was sagging. I grabbed my headlamp and stepped outside to check the panel because electrical problems still felt solvable, and solvable meant control. The fog was knee-high across the yard and thicker toward the lower fence. Conveyor lights from the mine ridge, miles away, cut through in intermittent bands. Pale white 1 second, then dim behind mist. Moonlight leaked through broken cloud, just enough to flatten depth. I reached the panel and found no trip, no scorch, no loose neutral. While I was there, the step flood flickered, steadied, and then dropped to half brightness like the voltage had been dragged down by a heavy load. Every instinct said, "Get back inside." I started toward the camper and caught movement at the edge of the rhododendron lane. It rose from fog in pieces. First an upper back line, dark against lighter mist. Then shoulders, broad and forward set, wider than the camper door by a clear margin. The head sat low between them at first, muzzle length visible only when conveyor lights swept across and drew a thin silver outline. It moved on two legs, not in a cartoon upright posture, more like a crouched man carrying weight through the hips. But the lower limbs were wrong. The hock joint sat high and bent opposite what my eye expected for a human knee, then extended in long, quiet steps, the covered ground too fast for its size. I froze beside the panel with the headlamp off, watching it cross from the brush toward the old fence line. It did not rush. It walked with purpose, testing each placement without sound, chest angling toward the camper windows where the interior light bled through curtains. When it reached the fence, it did not climb and it did not break stride. It gathered once and cleared top wire in one motion, landing inside the yard without touching metal. I heard no rattle from the posts. I heard my own breath, and from inside the camper, Aaron saying my name once through the wall. The shape paused broadside for 2 heartbeats, and that was when scale became undeniable. 7 feet would have been conservative if it stood straight. In the crouch, it still looked taller than me by a head and shoulders, with arms hanging long enough that the hands swung near the level of its upper thighs. Fur or hair along the back, red as dark clumps, wet or matted. The neck looked thick and too upright for a normal canid when it turned, and 2 eye reflections flashed amber green, then muted as it angled away from the flood. I stepped backward, heel catching gravel, and the sound was enough. The head snapped toward me with a speed that did not match the deliberate walk from seconds earlier. For one instant it held still, profile cut against fog and that distant conveyor glow. I saw the line of the muzzle open slightly as if scenting. Then it pivoted and moved along the camper wall, out of my direct sight, using the blind side where the light was weakest. I got to the door in 6 strides and went in hard enough that the frame shook. Aaron grabbed my arm, eyes wide, and I said the words I'd avoided for days. "It is not a bear. Get Noah's shoes on now." Noah was already standing with his backpack. "Did you see it?" "Yeah. What was it?" I looked at him and heard myself give the answer I could live with in that second. "Big predator. Smarter than a normal animal. We stay together and we move when I say." Outside, something brushed the aluminum skin in a long pass from rear corner to the door side, not scratching, just contact, like it wanted us to know exactly where it was. And the camper shifted a fraction on its jacks. Duke barked once from the house, and then went silent again. I killed the interior lights and watched through a slit in the blind, trying to catch another full view. All I got were fragments. A darker mass sliding through darker background, fog folding around it. One brief eye reflection at a height that made my stomach drop. Then nothing. 5 minutes later, the power stabilized as suddenly as it had sagged. Both floods returned to full output. The yard looked ordinary enough to insult me. We sat that way until dawn, shoes on, keys ready, no one sleeping. My mind kept trying to pull what I had seen back into known shapes. Sick moose, maybe, though we do not have moose there. Man in a ghillie suit on stilts, which was nonsense even as I thought it. A bear with mange and a trick of light. I tried each explanation, held it against the movement, the fence jump, the limb angles, the shoulders, and each one failed under its own weight. When first light hit the steps, I was still telling myself I had misread distance in fog, that fatigue had stretched shadows into things they were not, that if I checked the camera card and found static again, I could blame electronics and call it done. I stood at the door with my hand on the latch, repeating that to myself like a wire tag I wanted to believe, because the other option was accepting. I'd watched something walk my yard that did not belong to any field guide I had ever trusted. I opened the latch a quarter inch and listened through the gap first. No breath, no movement, just drip from the camper awning and the creek working downhill. As I stepped out, with the shotgun low and the flashlight still in my hand, even though daylight was coming in hard enough to color the gravel. The yard looked ordinary from 10 feet away and wrong from 2. The rear corner of the camper had fresh scoring in the paint. 3 lines this time, deeper than the ones from earlier in the week. I could fit the first segment of my little finger into the top groove. The metal curled outward in thin ribbons. On the lower panel, just above the wheel well, there was a streak of clear, viscous residue that had dried tacky and yellowed at the edges. Not sap and not anything from the camper systems. It smelled like wet dog and pennies when I got close. I moved slow around the side where I'd lost sight of it in fog. The gravel held 2 clean impressions near the step, and then a smear where weight had shifted and slid. Not paw prints, not boots. The front of each mark showed 4 deep points, but behind them there was a flattened area long enough to read as a midfoot, almost hand-like in layout, and the spacing between left and right was wider than my shoulders. Whatever made those had planted hard, then pivoted toward the door. I pulled the trail camera card with my thumb and slipped it into my pocket. Erin cracked the camper door behind me and whispered my name. I turned and put up a hand for quiet. She saw my face and shut the door without another question. My old laptop was in the truck because I used it for job manuals and breaker specs. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open, card adapter in, and played the overnight clips while dawn climbed over the ridge. At first, it was what I expected. Static at 9:06 when the power dipped, then bands of gray snow. At 9:11 there was one clean frame of the steps, with fog moving left to right. At 9:12, the image shifted as if something had touched the tree the camera was mounted on. Not a hard hit, a controlled push. The lens angle dropped 3 degrees. Then came 6 seconds that turned my stomach cold. A dark form entered from the right edge, too close for the camera to focus. I paused and advanced frame by frame. Coarse black-brown fur clumped into wet cords. A shoulder ridge rolling under skin. The side of a head with an elongated muzzle slick at the tip. Strands of saliva hanging and catching light from the flood in little glass threads. Triangular ears flattened back. It moved with its face angled toward the camper wall, not toward the camera. Ears which told me it was not wandering blind. It had a target. At second 4, one forelimb rose and pressed against the aluminum siding near the rear corner. The frame caught the hand in profile. Not paw, a hand. Long finger bones ending in pale, hooked claws. Each claw curved and narrow like old ivory. 5 digits, with the thumb set lower and farther back than a canine dew claw would ever sit. As it bore weight, the claws dragged and cut 3 bright grooves in the camper paint down to metal. I watched that part 3 times, hoping Video Artifact would save me. It did not. At second 6, the head turned half toward camera. One eye, reflected amber green, and then the frame broke to static again. I sat there with my hands on my knees and tried to steady my breathing before I went back inside. I had spent my whole adult life trusting that if you looked long enough, systems made sense. That clip made sense. That was the problem. The anatomy was coherent and purposeful, just not anything I knew how to name. When I stepped back into the camper, Erin was standing by the sink with Noah behind her, both of them fully dressed, both of them waiting for whatever answer I was going to give. Noah's backpack was already zipped and on the dinette bench. Erin said, "Tell me straight." I handed her the laptop and scrubbed to the clearest frame. She watched, froze it, and looked up with that fixed expression people get when their fear outruns speech. Noah leaned in, saw the hand on the siding, and went pale in a way I'd never seen on him before. He backed up one step and sat down without looking away from the screen. "Nikki, that is fake," he said quietly. "Right?" "No," I said. "That is from 20 feet away from where we slept." Erin closed the laptop with more force than she meant to and set it on the counter. "We are done. We leave now." "I know. Not after work. Not tonight. Now." "I know." I nodded toward the house shell. "Give me 20 minutes to move the dogs and throw essentials in the truck. Then we go to your sister's." She held my stare long enough to make sure I was not negotiating. 20. I should have left at that exact moment and never slowed down for anything that looked like evidence. Instead, I made the practical mistake I kept making. I thought one more pass around the perimeter would help us later if police or wildlife asked questions. I thought documentation was protection. I thought like a tradesman when I needed to think like prey. I crossed to the house, clipped Duke and Mags to leads, and brought them toward the truck. They resisted near the camper corner, both dogs leaning away so hard their collars creaked. Duke gave a low rumble and fixed on the rhododendron line. I looked where he looked and saw nothing but leaves and shadow. By late morning, cloud cover had burned off and the hollow felt almost normal again, bright enough that the night seemed like a bad story told too close to dawn. That was when I found the first sign it had shifted from circling us to studying me. My work-hard hat was gone from the truck passenger seat. I had left it there after checking the panel the night before. I tore through the cab, looked under seats, checked the camper, checked the house. Nothing. 10 minutes later, I found it, hanging from the top wire of the old fence near the creek cut, balanced by the chin strap, like someone had set it there carefully. No chew marks, no cracks, just placed. I did not tell Noah. I told Erin I'd moved it earlier and forgotten. She read the lie in one look and said nothing, which was worse than arguing. I loaded the truck anyway. Clothes, meds, Noah's school binder, dog food, shotgun case, the camera card, and the laptop. We were almost ready when my phone buzzed with a call from the contractor handling the fire repairs. He was at the county line with cabinets and needed access to verify measurements before unloading at a warehouse. If he delayed to tomorrow, we lost our install slot, and the claim clock stretched again. Under normal circumstances, that would have been annoying paperwork, but in that moment it became a wedge in a door that should have stayed shut. Erin heard enough of the call to understand. "No," she said, "do not do this. I can meet him at the road, hand him the key packet, and be done in 30 minutes. We leave now. I cannot keep this place if the claim collapses." She laughed once, short and sharp, from pure exhaustion. "Keep it for what, Brett?" Noah sat quiet on the bench, eyes moving between us like he was tracking a storm cell. I made the wrong compromise. I told them we would go to town in one vehicle, meet the contractor, and return before dark only if we had to grab what was left. Erin did not like it, but she agreed because it sounded temporary and controlled. We drove out together just after noon, dropped the dogs at Erin's sister's place, met the contractor in Beckley, August, and spent 4 hours signing forms, calling insurance, and pretending this was still a normal home repair problem with a schedule and a finish date. When we got back to the hollow in late afternoon, the first thing I saw was the camper door standing open 6 inches. I had deadbolted it myself. I stopped the truck 50 yards short and told Erin and Noah to stay inside with doors locked. She started to protest, then saw my face and nodded. I walked up with the shotgun and pushed the door wider using the barrel, keeping my body off angle from the opening. Nothing jumped. No movement inside. But almost every soft thing we had packed and left by the dinette was scattered. Not torn, moved. Noah's blue hoodie hung from the stove handle. Erin's purse sat in the sink upside down with its contents arranged in a line across the counter. Lip balm, a wallet, key fob, receipts, pen. My thermos stood on the floor by the bunk with the lid unscrewed and set beside it. The laptop was where I left it, but the screen had 3 parallel scratches across the top shell, same spacing as the camper corner. The smell was stronger inside than out. I backed out and relocked the door with shaking hands. This was no longer random contact with a large animal. This was selection, sorting, rehearsal. Erin met me halfway before I could wave her back. What happened? It got in. She looked past me at the camper and went rigid. Noah is not stepping foot in there again. He is not. Then we are gone. We are gone. We should have left at once. Instead, I made one last tactical choice because I wanted to know whether it was still close. I set the truck alarm. Nick moved Erin and Noah into the house shell where there was a solid core door and told them to keep lights off and stay on the phone with Erin's sister. Then I took a new road flare, my heavy jumper leads, and a spare flood to the camper step and rigged a brighter temporary light on an extension cord so I could load the final bins fast. Twilight in that hollow came earlier under cloud, and by the time I finished, the light was doing most of the work. Every brush movement pulled my eyes. Every pop from cooling metal sounded like a footfall. I kept telling myself 10 more minutes, then we drive. At 7:42, the temporary flood blinked once and steadied. At 7:43, both house lights dimmed together. The same pattern as the night before. My pulse climbed so fast it hurt behind my ears. I heard a scrape from the shed side and swung the flashlight. The beam caught aluminum siding, cinder blocks, stacked firewood. Nothing. Then another scrape, this one above me and behind. A slow drag of claw on metal. I pivoted and saw the rear corner of the camper bow in a fraction as weight leaned into it from the blind side. I moved toward the front to break line and nearly ran into it. 10 feet, maybe less. It stood half-turned in the spill of the flood, one shoulder toward me, head low and angled up. The snout was longer than a wolf's and heavier through the bridge, black nose wet and shining. Saliva hung in clear strands from the lower jaw and dropped to the gravel in thick threads. The fur was not sleek like a wild canine. It was coarse and uneven, black-brown with gray at the roots, clumped in ridges as if it had come out of creek water and dried in wind. Its ears were pinned flat. Its lips lifted just enough to show long yellow teeth, not in a full lunge display, more like a warning it expected me to read. One arm remained braced on the camper wall, hand again, fully visible this time. Long fingers splayed across aluminum, pale claws hooked and sunk in. As it shifted weight, those claws peeled down and carved fresh grooves in the paint with a sound like a screwdriver dragged across sheet metal. Its eyes locked on mine with a focus that stripped out every comforting lie I had left. Predators look at movement. This thing looked at me. I did not raise the shotgun. At that distance, with Aaron and Noah in the house behind me, the first move had to be position, not bravado. I took one slow step backward, then another, keeping my torso square, trying not to trigger chase. It tracked each step by leaning forward at the hips, nostrils flaring, reading my scent. The head tilted slightly, same deliberate study I had seen through the window. Then it made a sound I still hear in my sleep. Not a growl, not a bark. A rough exhale that rose at the end, almost like a short laugh pushed through a damaged throat. It released the camper wall, dropped from that half-rise into a lower crouch, and slipped left into shadow with almost no noise for its size. I turned and ran for the house. I got inside, shoved the door shut, and threw the bolt. Aaron and Noah were on the hallway floor where I'd told them to stay, both of them white-faced and shaking. Aaron grabbed my forearm hard enough to bruise and said, "Did you see it?" "Yeah." "Where?" "Right outside the camper." Noah whispered, "Is it gone?" I listened, saw where for a few seconds there was nothing. Then 3 soft taps came on the house siding by the window over the sink, spaced evenly, deliberate. The exact rhythm from the camper nights, transferred to the one place we had moved for safety. That was the point where I understood the crux of it, plain and cold. It was not patrolling territory and stumbling onto us. It had mapped our movements, tested barriers, and adjusted when we changed position. It had taken my hard hat, opened our door, handled our things, and shifted to the house. When we shifted to the house, we were not sharing space with a dangerous animal. We were in a pursuit pattern with something intelligent enough to treat us as targets, and me as the primary one. I did not speak for a few seconds because saying that out loud would make it fully real for them too. Then I said, "Natty, shoes on, keys in my hand. We leave together when I count, and nobody stops for anything." I counted to 3, cracked the bolt, and pulled the house door open with Noah between us and Aaron right on his shoulder. The porch light was still on, but weak, yellow instead of white, like the voltage was dragging through wet wire. The smell hit first, thicker than before, warm and rotten and metallic all at once. I scanned left toward the camper, right toward the shed, and saw no body, no eyes, nothing moving except fog sliding low over the grass. We moved anyway, quick and close, my hand on Noah's backpack handle so he could not drift. Halfway to the truck, my phone buzzed with 1 bar, then 2, then 1 again. I hit 911 and put it on speaker in my chest pocket, while I kept the shotgun down and forward. A dispatcher came on, I gave my address, and she said she could barely hear me. I said large predator on property, family with me, immediate threat. She asked if anyone was injured. I said not yet. She asked if the animal was still visible. I said no, but it was close. The line crackled, cut, came back with her voice clipped to every third word and then dropped entirely. I called Deputy Harmon next. Straight to voicemail, I called the wildlife officer. It rang twice, then dead silence, no greeting, no tone. I remember staring at that dark screen while walking and thinking how fast the world narrows when your help depends on towers and roads and someone choosing to answer. We reached the truck and Aaron got Noah in the back seat. She was climbing in when something slammed the bed from the blind side hard enough to rock the whole frame on its springs. Not a glancing hit. A committed impact. Erin cried out and dropped to one knee on gravel. I grabbed her under the arm and yanked her up as another hit came. Higher this time, metal groaning near the rear window. I swung the flashlight over the cab and caught only a blur crossing behind it low, then high, too fast for the beam to lock. Inside the camper, I said, "Now." "No," Erin said, breathless. "Truck, we go." "It is on the truck. Move." There are moments where argument burns time you do not have. This was one of them. I pushed Noah toward the camper steps, Erin right behind him, and we got through the door just as the floodlight over the shed blinked out completely. The step flood stayed on for another 2 seconds, flared brighter than normal, then died too. A total dark outside except a thin wash of moon through cloud and the far conveyor glow on the ridge. I threw the deadbolt, dropped the door bar, and killed the interior light so we were not silhouettes. The camper shrank around us in one breath, aluminum skin, thin windows, 50 feet from the road and miles from anything like fast help. Erin had both hands on Noah's shoulders, and I could feel him shaking through the floor. I put the shotgun on the dinette, took one breath, and forced my voice flat. "Bathroom floor, both of you. If I say move, you move. If I say down, you go down and stay there." Erin stared at me in the dark. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 3 nights ago." By full dark, with the cloud bank settling into the hollow, every sound carried farther and meant less. Something moved outside along the camper's rear wall, not rushing, dragging knuckles or claws or something hard along the siding in short passes. Then quiet. Then a tap near the bunk window. 2 taps near the door. It was not random anymore. It was checking sequence, checking response. I knew enough about testing circuits to recognize deliberate load steps when I heard them. I tried 911 again from the dinette, with the phone held high by the vent. 1 bar flashed. The call connected long enough for me to give my name twice and say we were trapped in the camper. Dispatch asked me to confirm county and nearest marker. I answered. She said units were tied on a wreck and 1 deputy was en route from the north end. Estimated 25 to 30 minutes if roads held. Then the call broke up and dropped a second time. I never got a call back. I told myself, keep breathing, keep decisions simple, keep your hands useful. I also told myself we were out of time for passive defense. The door bar and plywood might hold 1 hard hit, maybe 2. If it got both hands on that latch and pulled with full weight, we would be inside a can. The portable generator sat under a tarp, 3 feet from the step, where I had left it after running temp power earlier. Heavy gauge jumper leads were coiled in the underbench compartment. The steel step was bolted direct to the frame, and the door striker plate tied into that same metal path. The dangerous idea took shape in pieces I already understood. I could not beat its strength. I could overload contact. I pulled the jumper leads out, stripped insulation with my knife, and fed the wire ends through the lower cabinet gap to the door seam. Erin watched me work and whispered, "Brett, what is that?" "A chance." "For who?" "For us to get out alive." Outside, breathing returned at the window line, deep and measured, followed by a slow scratch on the glass that made Noah press both palms over his ears. The camper shifted on the jacks from weight against the rear corner. I clipped one lead to the steel step support through the cracked door edge, the other to the bare metal of the latch plate where I had scraped paint earlier repairing the striker. I unhooked the generator from the camper inlet to avoid backfeed, bonded the neutral lug to frame with a short copper jumper, and rigged a direct hotline to the leads. It was reckless and ugly, and exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed when they improvise scared. I checked every touch point twice because one mistake would cook me instead. The first real hit came on the door at 8:17 by my watch, a shoulder blow that bowed the top hinge and popped dust from the frame trim. Aaron flinched but stayed low with Noah in the bathroom well. The second hit was lower, followed by pressure on the handle. Metal creaked, then released. It was not trying to smash through now. It was trying to work the mechanism. I eased the generator choke, whispered for Aaron to cover Noah's ears, and pulled the cord. The engine caught on the second yank and settled into that rough portable hum I had heard on job sites my whole career. Outside movement stopped for one beat, then shifted right to left, circling toward the step. The smell surged through the door seam, hot and animal and sour, as I took position at the dinette corner with the shotgun shouldered and one hand on the improvised switch lead. My pulse was hammering so hard I could see it in the barrel wobble. In that small space, all my old explanations died quietly. No bear opens latches. No prankster moves like that through brush without sound. No story from a porch comes into your house and studies your family's routines for a week. Then it stood up in the flood of light. A power arc snapped somewhere near the house panel at that exact second, blew white for an instant, and the step flood flared back to full brightness like a camera flash held open. The light hit the thing broadside and gave me the whole of it with nowhere left to hide. It was roughly 7.5 feet tall when it rose, maybe more because it stayed slightly hunched at the shoulders. Massive chest, narrow waist, hips built for spring and drive, and digitigrade legs, ending in long splayed feet that balanced on the step edge with predatory precision. The torso was furred in uneven black-brown coats, some sections thick and matted with mud, some thinned enough to show scarred skin beneath. Across its left shoulder ran old white ridges, 3 long scars crossing newer tissue, healed but ugly, like it had survived another fight that should have ended it. Its head was wolf-like and wrong at the same time, muzzle elongated and heavy-jawed, ears triangular and pinned flat, neck too upright and muscular for any canid I had ever seen. The eyes were amber with green fire at the center, not glowing on their own, but throwing back every photon like polished stone. Those eyes tracked me with focused calculation, each then cut to the handle, then back to me. Its lips peeled up, exposing long yellowed teeth and wet black gums, and a rope of saliva dropped to the step and hissed where it touched hot metal from the arc flare. Its hands were the worst part. 5 long fingers jointed like a primate but ending in hooked claws 3 inches long, pale at the tips and dark at the base, flexing with independent control as it reached for the latch. There was intelligence in that movement. Not human, not anything I could soften with familiar language, but deliberate. It knew doors. It knew leverage. It knew exactly where to place weight. It planted 1 foot on the steel step and clamped 1 hand over the handle, the other bracing high on the frame. I hit the switch lead. The circuit closed with a hard crack and a shower of orange sparks at the latch plate. Its body locked in place instantly, muscles bunching and freezing, jaw snapping shut on a sound that came out as a choked bark. The smell of singed fur punched through the seam. It tried to pull free and seized harder instead, current riding hand to frame to foot across every wet contact point. I had maybe 1 second before it adapted or tore loose. I fired. Buckshot at that distance sounded like the camper exploded. The blast caught its left shoulder high, the scarred one, and drove fur and tissue back in a dark spray that hit the gravel and step. No cinematic throw, no dramatic flip, just a violent recoil and a guttural howl so deep it rattled the cabinet doors. The shock path broke as it twisted, one claw ripping a long curl of aluminum from the door edge. I grabbed the lit road flare from the counter, popped the cap against the sink, and pitched it low under its legs through the cracked door gap. Red magnesium light flooded the step and undercarriage in harsh color, smoke blooming thick. The flare rolled against its rear foot and ignited loose fur where moisture had burned off. Flame climbed in a fast orange tongue along the hock. It screamed then, a full-throated sound that was half rage, half pain, and lurched backward off the step, slamming into the cinder block and knocking it sideways. "Move!" I shouted. Aaron had Noah up before I finished the word. I kicked the door wide, stepped out into flare smoke with the shotgun up, and tracked left and right. It was on all fours for 3 strides, then upright again, staggering toward the creek cut, one arm hanging strange at the shoulder, fur smoking where the flare had kissed it. It turned once at the edge of the rhododendron, eyes catching red and white light together, and gave a hoarse warning bark that shook leaves loose above it. Then it dropped into the drainage and vanished downhill through brush, with crashing force this time. No stealth left. I did not chase. I did not watch for a better shot. I grabbed Noah by the jacket, Aaron by the wrist, and ran for the truck. Gravel under boots, flare smoke in my throat, my ears ringing from the shotgun blast. We got in, doors slammed, locks down. I turned the key and the engine hesitated 1/2 second that felt like a year, then caught. As we pulled out, headlights swept the step and showed what the floodlights had hidden. A fist-sized clump of burned black-brown fur on the gravel. 3 dark drops leading toward the creek cut, orange, and the jumper cable still clipped to the blood-smeared latch plate, swinging with engine vibration like a pendulum, marking the end of something. At the mouth of the hollow, with the county road finally under us and signal bars climbing back on my phone, Noah started gagging in the back seat from the smell memory and adrenaline. Aaron twisted around to steady him with one hand while pressing a dish towel to my forearm, where flying aluminum had opened a long slice I had not even felt happen. I dialed 911 again and got through clean this time. I told dispatch we were en route to Beckley. 3 occupants, 1 laceration, 1 juvenile in acute panic response, and a large, predatory animal attack on our property. I gave the address, the report number Harmon had filed. Sandin said officers needed to approach with lights and long guns if they went in at all. My voice sounded calm on that call. My hands were not. They shook on the wheel all the way to the highway, and every dark tree line at the edge of my headlights looked like it might stand up and start running. By the time we hit the emergency entrance in Beckley, my hands had cramped around the steering wheel so hard I had to pry my fingers loose, one by one. The fluorescent lights in the drop-off lane looked too bright, almost flat, like somebody had turned contrast down on the world. Aaron got Noah out first, one arm around his shoulders while he dry-heaved into a trash can by the sliding doors. I stepped out and nearly buckled when weight hit my left forearm and the pain finally registered in full. The cut from the aluminum was long, shallow at one end and open deep near the wrist, and my sleeve was stuck to it. Inside triage, the nurse asked what happened, and I heard myself give the same careful line I used with dispatch. Large predatory animal attack at our residence. We escaped. I got cut on metal during evacuation. She looked at my arm, then at Aaron, then at Noah shaking in the chair beside her, and whatever question she was about to ask changed shape. She said, "All right, we are doing vitals now. Stay with me." Noah could not stop gagging every few minutes, not from illness, but from memory. He kept saying the smell was still in his nose, even in that antiseptic hallway. Erin pressed a paper cup of water into his hands and kept her own breathing measured so he could mirror it. I sat on the edge of the treatment bed while a physician assistant irrigated my arm and picked tiny paint flecks out of the wound with tweezers. He asked if I had loss of sensation. I said no. He asked if I blacked out. I said no. He asked if I wanted law enforcement notified from the hospital side. I said yes. Deputy Harmon called me from the parking lot while I was getting stitched. He said a unit had reached the hollow after we left and found evidence consistent with an aggressive wildlife incident near the camper steps, including blood droplets and disturbed gravel. He also said the improvised wiring setup was still hot when they arrived, and they shut it down at the main. His voice carried that same controlled neutrality from the station desk, but it had less distance in it now. "You discharged your firearm?" he asked. "One round. In defensive? Any chance you hit a person?" "No." "You sure?" "I am sure." A pause, then, "All right. I need you at the substation tomorrow for a full statement." I said I would be there. He started to add something and stopped mid-sentence the way he had in person when his model did not fit what he was hearing. He never finished that thought, not then, not later. Aaron's sister Lacey met us before dawn and drove us to her place so I would not have to. Her house was 20 minutes from town, in a subdivision where porch lights touched each other across narrow yards. That first night there, every HVAC cycle made Noah flinch. I slept on a couch with my boots lined under the coffee table, woke at each refrigerator click, and checked the locks 3 times before sunrise. On the second morning, my bandage was already bleeding through because I had clenched that arm all night. 9 days passed in Lacey's guest rooms before anyone in my family slept longer than 2 hours at a stretch. By the second night, Noah would only sleep if the bathroom light stayed on. By the fourth, Erin started waking me before I woke myself, because she could hear the breath change right before the nightmares hit. Mine always started at the same point. The hand on the latch, claws flexing, and that look through the door seam like we were circuitry. It had already mapped. I gave my full statement at the substation on day 2. I brought printed photos of tracks with tape measurements, the scratch marks, the fogged window oval, the arranged deer remains by the fence, and still frames from the trail camera showing the hand and partial head. I also turned over the card copy and noted the static bursts at 9:06 and the one-frame eyes at windshield height from earlier nights. Harmon and another deputy logged all of it under a large predator incident, then asked me to describe the attacker. This was the decision point I had been circling since the truck left our hollow. I did not tell them upright wolf. I did not describe 7.5 feet and digitigrade legs and hands that worked a latch. I said very large canid-like predator exhibiting unusual bipedal posture during portions of the encounter. It was clumsy language, but it kept the report inside a category they would process instead of dismiss. I hated doing it. I also needed a usable record for insurance, liability, and whatever came next. The wildlife officer, Miles Carver, came out the following afternoon while rain moved through in steady bands. He was the first official who looked at the scene and did not laugh, did not offer a quick coyote answer, and did not perform certainty for my benefit. He measured the step height, the gouges in aluminum, and the stride marks that remained where the rain had not flattened everything. He bagged the burned fir clump from gravel, swabbed the dark drops leading toward the creek cut, photographed the hard hat placement site by the fence, and took cast attempts on 2 partial impressions under tarp cover. He also asked questions nobody else asked. Why the activity tracked my truck light arrival times, why the dogs froze instead of pursued, why contact shifted from camper to house after we moved. Standing by the cinder blocks in that rain, he said quietly, "And I cannot give you a species today. I can document anomalies." "Am I supposed to go back there tonight?" I asked. "With my family?" He looked toward the rhododendron line for a long second before answering. If this were my family, no. That was the closest thing to validation I got from an authority figure. 3 days later, Carver called with preliminary lab notes. Hair sample, mammalian degraded, no clean match against available wildlife panel. Blood trace, insufficient DNA quality, contamination from rain and soil. Casts, incomplete, not admissible for formal species identification. File status moved to pending unusual predator activity, then stalled there. No closure letter, no follow-up theory, just an administrative dead end where strange evidence goes to dry out. By the second week of October, we had made the choice official. We were selling the Hollow property. I met the realtor on the front porch in daylight, with all exterior lights on anyway, because that had become reflex. She walked the line, took notes, and asked why we were pricing below comps. I told her we needed speed more than margin. She glanced at the camper siding and the patched door edge and gave me a loaded look I recognized from everyone else who sensed there was more story than paperwork. She asked once, "Any disclosures beyond the fire repair?" I said animal damage, documented. She wrote it down and did not push. We took a loss that still stings when I look at the numbers. I quit night rotation at the mine before the sale even closed. Calvin pulled me aside in the parking lot on my last evening shift and said, "You really leaving over that?" The old joke was gone from his tone. I said yes. He nodded like he wanted to ask what I'd seen and decided he did not want the answer. That was another unfinished sentence that stayed unfinished. I started daytime maintenance work for a county school system outside Charleston. Steady hours, lit parking lots, people around. The pay was lower, the stress cleaner. Breaker replacements, gym lighting, boiler controls, classroom circuits. I refused overnight rural call-outs and put that refusal in writing. At home, I installed steel core exterior doors, thermal cameras with local recording, battery backups on separate circuits, and perimeter lights on independent runs so one sag would not blind the whole property. Every system got tested weekly. I taught Aaron the panels and taught Noah, when he was ready, how to verify battery state and camera uptime without turning it into a ritual of fear. The relationship damage took longer than the move. Aaron and I came close to splitting in November because my vigilance turned every creak into an argument. If she opened a window at dusk, I closed it. If Noah left shoes outside, I snapped. One Friday, Noah refused to come for his weekend and told Aaron on speaker that I had kept them in that camper after the breathing started, and he was right to say it. I sat at the kitchen table listening to my own failure in a 12-year-old voice and could not defend myself. Family counseling started the next week. Trauma therapy for me, separate sessions for Noah, joint sessions when he agreed. No magic breakthrough, no one speech that fixed it. We rebuilt trust with routines. Doors checked once, not 6 times. Were lights out by a set hour. No firearms in common rooms. No surprise route changes without saying why. By Christmas, Noah was spending full weekends again. By spring, he stopped scanning every tree line from the car window. I live now in a rented townhouse outside Charleston, still married to Aaron, still employed, physically safe. That part is real and stable. The immediate ordeal ended the night of the generator, the shot, and the flare. We never had another incident at any place we lived after that, and no one in that hollow reported follow-on attacks tied to us. I know because I checked through the realtor, through Carver once more, and through 2 neighbors who would have called if anything repeated. I still do not go into deep woods after dusk. I still wake fast at certain sounds. Slow scraping on siding, heavy breathing through a vent, a power dip that makes lights hesitate. Sleep comes in shorter blocks than it used to. Some nights I sit in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with a cup of coffee and watch the thermal feed, even though I know it is an empty fence line and a trash can warming in summer air. I kept 3 physical pieces from that night and accounted for the rest. The gouged camper door handle came off before the sale and sits in a sealed tote in my utility closet. The burned patch of fur stayed in evidence long enough for Carver's chain of custody, then was released when the file stalled. I sealed it in clear evidence plastic with his case number still on the label. The blood-stained jumper cable was photographed by deputies, returned after they closed their active response, and now hangs coiled on a peg above my bench, weak insulation cut where I stripped it in panic. The trail camera files are backed up on 2 drives and 1 printed still packet. The original camper step and siding went with the property sale after documentation. The arranged items inside the camper were photographed and listed in my supplemental statement. The moved hard hat went back in the truck only long enough to photograph where it had been placed. Then I threw it away because I could not stand seeing it on a hook. People ask, when they ask at all, what I think it was. I do not give big theories anymore. I can tell you what I observed. Timing linked to my arrival lights, odor pulses, silence in prey species, freeze behavior in trained hounds, deliberate testing of barriers, object placement, latch manipulation, and adaptive movement when we changed position. I can tell you it bled. He's burned and withdrew after an electrical shock, buckshot impact, and flare ignition. I can tell you no lab gave me a neat label and no authority offered a complete explanation. I also tell them this because it matters more than naming it. I was not imagining it and I was not drunk on stories. I was a practical man in a bad pattern who waited too long to accept what the evidence already said. We survived because at the last possible minute, we acted like survival was the only job left. That hollow took our old sense of safety and did not give it back. But it did not take my family. I live with the trade-offs of that every day, and I'm still here to say it out loud.